Hi, I'm Heidi Thorne, and welcome to the Heidi Thorne Show. I'm your host, and in this podcast, I share with you my real-world self-publishing and small business experience. So let's get started with today's show. Now, last week, I introduced the video version of the podcast that's available on YouTube. And it's also going to be available on YouTube this week too, but we're going to be recording it live on Facebook Live first. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because podcasts are kind of one-sided in a way. I'm talking to you, but you're not really able to talk to me. So what I'm doing is doing it on Facebook Live so that you can put in comments or questions. If they come in during the live broadcast, that's fine. I will try and answer as many as I can during the live broadcast. If not, I will answer them in the Facebook Live comment feed later on. So I hope you enjoy it, and I really would appreciate if you would make a comment whether you like to see it live, you like the YouTube videos, you prefer audio. This is all an experiment, so I'd really like your feedback on that. And today we're going to be talking about self-publishing workbooks and journals. Now, those are really kind of easy self-publishing projects, and I don't see a lot of people doing them, but they can be really, really valuable. And let me give you some background on how I really got rolling with the workbook thing. I had a client who was writing her book. She's a consultant, and so she wrote a book. She wanted to use it to help promote her business and to work with her clients. So, I'm doing the editing and whatnot, and it's filled with questions and exercises and all of that. And I had to ask her, I said, this really looks like it could be a workbook or an educational tool more than just a standard book. And that was a really light bulb moment, I think, for both of us, for her especially, because what we did is we looked at her book and we revamped it into a workbook format. And it really turned out super good. So she published it through CreateSpace, which of course is now Kindle Direct Publishing, but it was really easy for her to do. And now she uses it in two ways. The first way she uses it is she uses it kind of as a program for people who aren't really ready to go through the whole consulting thing with her. So it's a way they can kind of work with her. They might be more do-it-yourselfer type of people, but she can get that audience in, and then one day when they're ready, they can know all about her and know how she works. Now, she also uses it as an onboarding tool for her clients. So they work through the workbook, and then they're really ready to do even more work with her. So it turned out really good, and it was a way for her to expand her business. So that's one way you can do it. And you can get really, really creative in terms of what you want to do with a workbook or journal. Don't think it's just for business or for life coaching or business coaching or anything like that. I mean, think of the possibilities you could use it for, like fiction. Maybe you could talk about your story and have your client, not your clients, your readers fill in their thoughts about the story in a little bit of a journal format. There's just a lot of ways that you can use this tool to help your writing business. Now, some of the benefits of a workbook or journal are, first of all, that it is interactive and it engages your audience, which we've talked about in a way here. It has a really high perceived value. Now, we'll talk a little bit about some of the problems that authors have in writing workbooks. It really is more of an author problem than a reader problem. It's an additional book sale. So, for example, let's say you have your primary book, which talks about something you're an expert in. And maybe it gives tips and that sort of thing, but if you can provide the companion workbook for it, that's an additional book sale for you. So it does expand your income possibilities as well. And lastly, what it does is it engages multiple senses. When you write things down, it can engage your audience all the more. And so I think there's just a lot of benefits to doing workbooks and journals, and I've done a couple of them myself. Now, some of the challenges of doing workbooks and journals is that there's a physical issue with it. When you do them with CreateSpace, which is now Kindle Direct Publishing, you do what's called a perfect bound book. Now, perfect bound means that you won't be able to see this if you're just listening to the audio. It is glued into the center of the book, all the pages are, so it doesn't lay flat. Now, that makes it difficult to write in it, and usually the smaller the book, the more difficult it is to write in it when it's perfect bound. Now, I did that for my book called Looking Questions, which is 31 questions that can change your business and your life. It's a journal type of book. And originally, I didn't put any workbook aspect to it either, but then one of my business coach friends said, I really would like some lines in the book so I could write my answers. So I turned it into a journal type book, and I don't know if you can see that here, but I've added a few lines for each question that they can answer their questions right in the book. And so that has worked out really pretty well. It's not a super small book, but it does present a little bit of a difficulty, but if you have a workbook where they're going to be having to do a lot of writing, lots of answering of questions, maybe doing drawings or sketches or things like that, you really want to look at doing a larger book. Now, I did that for my 101 writing business writing prompts, and it's an 8.5 by 11 size book. And then it is perfect bound, which is the problem, but a bigger book lays flatter. So it's easier for your readers to read and write in the book. So if you're going to have a workbook that goes big, or that has a lot of material that they have to write in, go bigger with the format. Now, the reason that I'm talking about these perfect bound books, you'd think, well, why don't you think about doing a spiral workbook? And you know what? Spiral workbooks are probably the ideal because they lay flat. They're just really easy in terms of the reader or user. However, spiral workbooks are problematic on a lot of levels from a self-publishing standpoint. First of all, they can be very, very expensive because you have to go with a service such as like a FedEx, Kinko's type store, or the quick print type of places. And then the problem with the spiral is that they are not through like the Amazon system, like CreateSpace KDP is. You have to use the Amazon FBA, or Fulfillment by Amazon because they don't do, KDP does not do spiral bound books. Maybe at some point in the future, however, I'm not so sure, because they are a lot of work and they're kind of expensive. The other bad thing about the spiral workbooks, unless you're using them in in-person events, is that if you do a fulfillment by Amazon type of arrangement to sell them, you might have to shrink wrap the book because it doesn't warehouse well. Spiral workbooks and journals are very fragile from a physical standpoint. The spirals can get damaged and the pages can twist and then they get damaged and then they're unsaleable. So you have a lot of issues with the physical part of a workbook if you go spiral. It's not that they're bad, and they're great if you're doing in-person events and you're going to be giving them to the reader or user. But if you're going to be doing them in a retail type situation, such as through Amazon, you really do need to have some shrink wrapping and other things involved. So it can be very, very expensive and a lot of work. Now there is a last type of what I would call more of a journal than a workbook, and that would be hardcover. And it's pretty rare, but I do see this in some specialty markets. So for example, when I was a baby, my parents got a baby's first year type of hardcover book where they could write in all kinds of details about my first year. And so those kinds of things are great self-publishing projects because, you know, you're not going to be doing a lot of the writing, your readers are. But they're keepsake book, what I would call a keepsake book. So you can use services such as, like Lulu, I think Shutterfly, those types of organizations will do it. Like Lulu would have a retail presence where you could sell through Lulu to sell your books. But then if you want to sell them on Amazon, then again, you're into the fulfillment by Amazon situation. So they're definitely a more expensive option for a workbook or journal. But it's something, if that's a specialty market for you, it might be something to consider. And I think they're kind of cool. I think this is a great way to engage with your audience. Now, there's one more tip for doing the workbooks, and you want to leave, when you're printing and preparing them, you want to leave enough room between the lines for them to write into the workbook. Otherwise, it's difficult for them, and it just looks kind of schlocky anyway. But I think where authors get tripped up with the workbook journal situation, and it's a really good way to expand your book sales, is that they still have the words per pound thing going on in their head, that they think it has to have, every book has to have a lot of words. It doesn't, especially for workbooks. You want to be able, though, to write thoughtful and insightful questions. That is a valuable thing for readers. Think about if you've ever done coaching or hired a coach. I know that when I've hired a coach, the questions that they ask, the thoughtful questions they ask, really have changed my thinking in so many ways. And that's what you're doing when you're creating a workbook, unless it's, simple stuff like math, which has one answer. But most of the time, a workbook is to incite some thoughts and some reflection, and being able to answer the right questions or great questions. And the way you prepare the question is so important, and it's so valuable for your readers. It's an art. So don't go for the words per pound thing and think, oh my goodness, I don't have enough words in here. They won't buy it. They will. And sometimes you can charge some pretty good prices. I've seen workbooks up into the $20 to $30 range. So, it depends on your market, and you have to do all of your pricing and all of that as you would for any other book. But I think it's an option worth considering. And so I hope I've given you some things to think about. I've asked the right question. Are you going to do a workbook, and can it work with your particular writing business? So I hope it's given you some great ideas. And if it has, I hope you'll leave a comment on the Facebook Live, on the YouTube video version of this, or give a great rating on iTunes for the audio version. Now, the podcast, the rebroadcast of it, will be available on Facebook, on my Facebook page, Heidi Thorne Communications, all one word. It will be available on YouTube. It will be available in audio, as usual, on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. Now, if you're looking for my books, they're available on my Amazon author page. Just type in Heidi Thorne and it should have a listing for my author page. And it will also include my audiobooks, but my audiobooks are also available on Audible and iTunes. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I appreciate your support. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week.